All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of our Conscious Conversation series. I am excited tonight to introduce our guest, Kagiso Msimango. Thank you so much for joining us, Kagiso.
Thanks for having me.
So tonight, I thought we would focus on your new book, which I love, and I've been cramming today to get some content for our talk. There's such a wide array of really good stuff in here, stuff that speaks to my heart, stuff that I've gone through in my own journey of marginally awakening. Maybe we can put it that way. But I wanted to start off. Last week, I spoke to Dr. Matt Zylstra, who is really into the interconnectedness of nature and humanity and nature. And it was fascinating reading in your introduction that you used to speak to trees as a child. Do you still speak to trees? Tell us a bit about that.
I do, but not in the way that I used to as a child. So when I was a kid, I could vividly have conversations the way I'm having a conversation with you, as weird as that. Because usually when you think about speaking to something, you feel like it has to have a face, right? Like there's a mouth and a voice box, but there was an actual exchange. And so first of all, for the longest time, I actually forgot that I could speak to trees until one day we were hanging out. I think it was Christmas or something. Oh, I'm so glad that someone put that video on. I hate talking to people's names. It feels so weird. So thank you, Cindy, for showing your face. So I was chatting to my cousin. We were just sitting and we were talking, and she said, "My God, I used to hate having to walk with you from school because we had to stop all the time so you could speak to your bloody trees." And then these memories started flooding back into my mind. And it's odd that for a big part of my life, I'd completely forgotten about that. Although I still used to spend a lot of time in nature. And what I do, which I still do now, I'll sit with my back against the tree and then I'll ask a question or say something and I'll just know. I'll have a knowing of the answer. But before, when I was young, it was an actual communication.
Amazing. And I think that's, we were just chatting before we went live on, schooling and education and children, and how much of that innate connectivity is lost when, children are shunted into strong left brain thinking, getting into mathematics when they're still trying to talk to trees.
Yes, it's a pity. Yeah. And actually, going back to that conversation, I know that we started it before, but about very logical things taking you out of your body. So so I did an advanced breathwork practitioner course, and I talk about it briefly in the book as well. And the right way that we breathe, and you've got small kids, it's belly breaths, where when you inhale, you extend out, and then when you exhale, your tummy depresses. But most adults, when we inhale, we puff up, right? We breathe into our chests. And we were talking in our class, trying to figure out when that switch happens from that natural belly breathing to that anxious breath into your brain. And we couldn't find any medical stuff around it, but together, from anecdotal evidence, it's around that time when you start using more of your left brain as well. It's like literally some of your spirit leaves the intelligence of your body and gets occupied in your brain.
For sure, yeah. It probably also has something to do with fear.
Yes, because that is an anxious breath. Yeah. Usually when you worry, you breathe here. So once you start being in your left brain, that's when you have senses of danger and being disconnected and all of those things, So it's interesting how it's all connected. And just changing how you breathe makes you feel more held, more safe, more connected.
Absolutely. I mean, we'll get to, because one of the things I want to get, this is your book, just to show everybody. Fantastic. If you guys don't have it, grab it now from bookshops, places like Loot, which is where I got mine from. In the book, you talk about your journey of, and I'm going to swear a lot because your book is called How to Unfuck Yourself.
Yes, yay.
If people have a problem with the vibration of guttural utterances, maybe they need to read your book even more, because then they need to unfuck their guttural utterance judgment. But, you went through a journey of going through adrenal fatigue and burnout. Maybe if you could just touch on that a little bit, like what caused you to actually write this book?
To be honest, I didn't write this book for people. I know it's not a great thing to say when you're doing the horse and pony ride to get people to buy your book, but I didn't write it for people. And so this is my third book. And I suppose I still do, I just didn't do it this year because of the whole COVID-19 84 thing. But the retreat that I run was called the Unfuck Yourself Retreat. And then my publisher, about 3 years ago, said, that's a really cool title. You must write a book called Unfuck Yourself. And I was like, yeah, I'll write it. But at the time, I'd just been diagnosed with adrenal fatigue. So I said to her, I can't write a book right now. I need to sort myself out. So it's weird that I had a title for a book, but that was literally all of the brief, And then last year she started harassing me and telling me that there's a guy who wrote a book called The Subtle Art of Unfucking Yourself or something. You need to get on this Unfuck Yourself book before the whole thing goes, because she's a publisher, she's thinking like that.
Yeah.
So eventually I said then, I'm like, okay, I'm supposed to write a book called Unfuck Yourself. And I thought about the retreat that we have, and the retreat is 4 days. It's quite intensive, but we usually pick one thing that we'll focus on, right? And I thought, okay, if you're going to write a book, I can squeeze in as much retreats into it as possible, perhaps. And I tried to do that. That didn't work out. And I was like, okay, let me write a book about adrenal fatigue. And I thought it was going to have 3 acts. Like I was hopping along happily, and I got diagnosed, then I got a cure, and here I am being shiny. And I couldn't write that one either. I didn't want to be written. And eventually I thought, maybe let me write a book about all the moments in my life that I felt like utterly and thoroughly fucked, and I'd hit rock bottom. And to some extent, how I got there and also how I got myself out. There's that saying that you can either be an example or you can be a cautionary tale. But I figured, let me be both. Let me be the cautionary tale and also the example, which is honest. And that's the thing with everybody. And I have half a career, because I sort of have 2 careers, as a life coach. And part of it is to try and act like you've got your shit together all the time, which is not true for anyone, So it's like I'm going to like lay it bare. And I say quite a lot of things in that book that are probably ill-advised if I want to have any more clients, but that's life. That's how it goes.
Amazing. Okay, that's fantastic. And I found it fascinating reading your story too, because you just mentioned 1984. You say that that's when, a large part of your awakening journey started, post a car accident. So
yeah.
It was fascinating.
So you know what? I actually had another interview. I hope this one is more fun than that one, actually. But I had another interview, and the lady made an interesting connection for me, which I hadn't made. So she as well wanted to speak about adrenal fatigue and what caused it. And she was quite fascinated about my story that I stopped praying when I was 8 years old in 1984. And she said to me, does that have anything to do with adrenal fatigue? And I never made the connection, and I'm not a Christian, but I do believe in a higher power and organizing principle of some sort. But being an 8-year-old coming out of a Christian environment, that is that higher power. It's the Christian God, our Father who art in heaven. And until she said it, I didn't realize, because primarily adrenal fatigue is about being in a space of fear, lack of safety, being frightened all the time. And I can imagine that at 8, I didn't stop believing that there was God. I just thought God doesn't give a shit about me. And it made me think that perhaps that's when I started being in a flight or fight response place, that I have to look out for myself, because this great big being who's looking out for everybody else clearly is not interested in me. And I never made the connection until she asked me.
Sure. I mean, 7, 8 is such a powerful time in a child's life, shifting from, full connectivity to suddenly having an ego budding and exploring, and the rational mind coming on. So definitely.
But you know what, in a way it was sabotage, because I've always said to people, and I think I speak about it in my first book, that nature's always been my church. I've been very connected to nature. I mean, like I said, I used to talk to trees and whatever, and I was always very held by life in the organic sense. And then I went to Sunday school and they told me about this other guy. It's like you were friends with the CEO and they're like, but wait, there's the chairman of the board, right? And that's the guy that runs everything. You're like, oh, okay, let me try this guy out. And the first time I tried to get a meeting with him, he wasn't interested. So for a while that like tipped me over, but I found myself way back to nature after a while. But I think that it did create a dent of some sort in my life.
Sure. And I mean, I love that being in Africa. I think Africa, maybe more than any other place, the connection to raw nature is still so strong here. And the people still have, many of them have the connection, but certainly the memory of living fully integrated into nature, the way our ancestors have for hundreds of thousands of years, and the way that the Western world disconnects us and puts us in boxes. And a lot of your book is about those boxes and how to get out of those boxes again. Yeah, I mean, one of just to go to one of my favorite pages throughout your book, Weaving Your Story, you talk about your commandments. And I thought if we could just spend 2 minutes on each one, there's such great depth there to give people action steps right now in their own lives for things that they can do. And, what I love to do in these talks is just get into what can we do, right? I mean, everyone's busy, everyone's got a ton of stuff going on, everyone's dealing with their shit all the time. So what worked for you, and maybe it'll work for someone else. If you're amped for that, you do that.
Oh.
I'll remind you what they are. So I'll read them out to you.
Yes.
Number one was, only treat as gospel what you've experienced firsthand or sourced from within. To all other data, add a bag of salt. So before you go into that, what I love about that is right now we're dealing with this massive psyop called gaslighting. Have you heard about this?
Yeah.
So gaslighting is really just your world and your perception tells you something, but the media and everything else out there tells you a totally different thing. And you're going, which is true? So it creates cognitive dissonance. So it disconnects you from your own intrinsic perceptions of the world, and it makes you doubt everything you see. So to me, that first commandment speaks very much like that. If I go around to friends and family, I'm like, are you seeing dead people lying all over the place? Like, is the pandemic hectic in your life? And most of them are like, I don't know anybody. Like, okay, interesting. Tell us more about number one.
That is precisely what it is. But I didn't want to put people's backs up about how I presented it. Like, for instance, a lot of people that I follow on Instagram will say people are asleep or call them sheeple or very derogatory things like that. And that's no way. I've had like a 23-year career in marketing and media. If you want people to hear you, you can't offend them. You can't be that abrasive. Okay. So I always find that if you tell a story, well, you tell the right story, but if you tell a story, people can make those conclusions for themselves. And I feel that the fact that I have worked in media and marketing for so long is that whether we like to say it or not, the whole job of media and advertising is to manipulate people, right? Buy this, think this, do that. And I am terribly good at it, the marketing thing. So I understand how it's done. And we need to grow up. There's a naivety that people have where we assume that authority figures have our best interest at heart. I suspect that most people who are listening now, I suspect that I'm preaching to the converted, but I was hoping that this book is going to go to a much broader audience, and I didn't want to come at people like you're sheeple, you're asleep or whatever. So I wanted to use stories. Like, I think I might have been speaking to you the last time we spoke, or I was speaking to someone else, I don't remember, but I was making an example about fat-free yogurt, because it's something that somebody can understand. So a while ago, the whole thing was that fat is bad for you. Cut out fat if you want to be healthy, blah, 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 blah. And you genuinely want to be healthy. And your doctor says you need to lose weight. So you say, okay, I'm going to cut out fat. And then you go to your Woolies, Pick and Pay, wherever you go, and you see yogurt, it says low fat, or it even says fat free. And you assume that they made the fat free version because they care for you and your health, right? But no, that's not why they did it. It's because nobody is buying the full cream one anymore. So they have to shift and do the fat free. However, what they don't tell you is that fat makes stuff taste good. And if you take the fat out of it, it's going to taste like cardboard. So then they put sugar and all sorts of creepy GMO flavorants and whatever to replace that fat, right? And nobody's going to volunteer that information. And even if they're forced to put it on the label, it's weird chemical things that you don't understand. And you think, oh, Nestle or Danone or whatever made low-fat yogurt because they care about me. And we need to stop being those people. And it's not just about, yogurt is one example, but we have to understand, and not everybody is evil and thinking, how can I separate them from their health all the time, right? But most people, most organizations, most institutions, most governments, ultimately they're made up of people. And those people will always put their own agendas ahead of yours. And if there's a conflict between what they want and what is for your well-being, they're going to pick themselves. So it's your responsibility to get a sense of what their agenda might be, so that you know how to evaluate the information that they give you.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said that better myself. Thanks.
You can keep that one. You're welcome.
Telling people to read labels forever. If you don't know what the thing is on the label, don't buy it.
If you can't pronounce it, don't buy it.
Can't pronounce it, don't buy it. Yeah, exactly. Love that. Yeah, people still think that governments have their best interest at heart. Amazing.
No, I mean, I'm hoping that the past 2-3 months have disabused anyone of that illusion, if there was still anyone who was hanging on to that.
Let's hope so. I mean, this one very much links into number 10, which is everyone is fucking with your mind. Join them. Because in that chapter, you talk about marketing and advertising and how they're specifically manipulating you to buy the product.
Yes.
So tell us more. Join them. How are we going to join them?
So how you join them is that primarily because I'm thinking we've got 13 of these, so I'm going to try and keep it concise.
I'll jump around. We don't have to go through all of them.
That's cool. Algorithms, right? We all sort of understand the whole idea of algorithms. If you Google a couple of websites that talk about something, you start getting served more of that thing and things that are like that, right? And your brain it's just like that. It's software, it's organic, but it's like a computer. And the things that you click on in your life with your attention, you start noticing more of them. I don't want to get into the debate of whether you get more of them or not, but you start noticing more of them. And so I did an exercise with my daughter's nanny when the whole Corona thing was starting, and every time she went off, she'd come back with all these weird horror stories, you know? And then I said to her, but using terms that she could understand. And I said to her, a pandemic does not need 24 hours, 7-day-a-week PR. If there's a pandemic, you'll know. Like, you don't need to hear it on the radio. You don't want to watch it on TV or whatever, right? It feels like that because everybody is putting so much attention on it. And then I started taking her when we went, remember when it was serious lockdown and you couldn't really go anywhere? So we take a walk every day. And I said, come with me. And I said, I want you to pick, and I wanted to pick something where she couldn't talk herself out of it. And I said, I want you to count the dead birds that we come across. For whatever reason, I saw one and I said, take notes. So there was about 2. And then the next time we walked, maybe 6 or whatever. And I'm like, do you think there are more birds dying, or do you think because you've been counting them, it seems like there are more birds dying? And she was like, I think it's because I've been paying attention to them. And I'm like, exactly, you know, it's the same with this thing. And And essentially what I say about fucking with your own mind is that you get to decide what comes into your reality. And it's similar to, like you said, from the other point that we spoke about. You need to manage the information that comes in. And you do that by what you give your attention to and what you engage with.
So be very careful about what you're watching and listening to, and maybe check your TV out.
Yes, and you know, the thing is, because some of us are more sensitive than others, often, especially, I don't know, it happens, for me, it happens more with the radio than the TV. I don't know, maybe it's a sound thing. Like I can feel that information literally like pushing against me, the fear and the control and the heaviness. And not everybody's fortunate enough to be sensitive to the fact that it's happening, but it's still happening. You know, because I'm lucky enough to know that I'm feeling fearful and crappy because of this thing that happened to me. Somebody else thinks they're genuinely fearful and crappy, and they don't understand that it's an infection. It's a data infection. It's a virus that's been introduced to your system.
Yeah, very well put.
I sound a lot more radical than I am, by the way. I took off my tin foil for the thing.
The fear is the virus, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just going to jump around to some of my favorites. Number 3 was be wary of turning your preferences into judgments. I really found that a profound one.
Yo, wow, I don't remember what that's about. Can you believe it? I don't know what I said about it in the book, but I know what that is about, right? And
Yes.
so for a long time, for about a couple of years now, I've been obsessed with this idea of atonement. And oddly enough, it was from watching a really stupid TV show. But the concept of atonement, which is very biblical about forgive me, Father, for I've sinned, and then they give you penance, and then you atone for your sins. And the word, so I like words and playing around with words, and the word at one meant, right? And the big, one of the biggest games of the manipulation that we're stuck in is division, you know, black versus white, male versus female, this political party versus that, straight people versus gay people, gay and straight people versus transgender people. Like they cut out pieces, and then you stay in your box and you fight people who don't believe there's corona versus the ones who do, vegans versus, but they chop us into tiny little pieces, and we're busy fighting with each other. And more often than not, the divisions that stick and are successful is because there is a genuine wounding, right? So every now and then men fight with women, women say men are trash, and they can produce evidence that you rape us, you kill us, you've suppressed us, we get 79 cents to every 1 rand you get paid. There's real pain behind it. That's why the division that's created works, because you can see how you've been victimized, right? But the thing is, we fight and yell at each other because you want people to see where you've been wounded so that they can acknowledge your pain and stop hurting you, right? So you can feel safe. The only reason you ever say to someone, this is what you've done to me, to my ancestors, to my people, to anything, is because genuinely deep down you want them to stop. See the hurt so that you can stop. And the thing that we don't understand is that every time you go at people like that, the only response you get is that it becomes one-upmanship about who hurt who first, the most, the longest, who gets the most joy out of it, blah, blah, and we get nowhere. And where the healing goes back to that oddly biblical thing about at one meant, where you find the oneness and you find yourself inside the other person and you help them find them inside of you. That's where the healing happens. And often how we become manipulated is because we turn our preferences into judgments. So perhaps my preference is to be vegan and not eat things with a heartbeat. It's different. If I hold as a preference, it'll be harder for someone to manipulate me to get me to go spill red paint on someone eating a burger than if I hold it as a judgment. I don't know if that's how I spoke about it in the book, but that's the thing, that we all get to prefer whatever we prefer. But once we make it a judgment and there's a right way to do something and a wrong way to do something, then we become very easy to manipulate, and people hijack our hard-based agendas to make the world better for their own nefarious purposes.
Yeah, I find it such a tricky one because, live and let live, where, you have your preferences, you live life from that. I mean, being open to other people's perspectives is really growth. Otherwise, you'll just kind of get stuck in your own and grow old in your own little box. But
you know what? Sometimes you don't even need to be open. You don't even need to talk or fraternize to people who rub you up the wrong way. But as long as you have a sense that this is how I prefer, this is what I choose, not my way is right, and this is, that when you make it very concrete and hard and there's no sway, that's where it hurts you, funnily enough, not so much that.
Yeah, and I suppose where the rubber hits the road is when someone is actually in your face, hurting you in some way, shape, or form. Like, you need to stand your ground. So there's, letting people be, and then there's also saying, no, this is my boundary, no further.
Yes, of course, yes.
Interesting in the world we live in, where, someone might be knocking on our door soon going, here's your injection for your flu.
Oh, no, I don't think that's going to play out. I honestly don't think that's going to play out. I feel like every time the envelope is pushed off, so to a very large extent, we've relinquished a lot of our freedoms unwittingly by believing, like I said, that we're quite childish in a way, thinking that all these authority figures are here for our well-being. And we've given up a lot of freedoms because, like, my kids will let me do all sorts of things because they trust me to take care of them. And we've done that a lot. But now that things are being taken away from us as opposed to us giving it, that's forced a lot of people to grow up and say, wait, and think. And I feel like every time they push, they get the opposite, where we wake up and figure out that there's something wrong about how this whole thing is set up. So I have faith that we're not going to get there.
Challenging times allow people to push up against things and grow. I mean, it's the most exciting time, absolutely. Oh, we're not going to get too many, but you are a human being. Learn to be. In our do world, that's a profound one.
Yes, that was a very big one for me. So when I was trying to figure out the adrenal fatigue, and I ultimately found out, which I'm glad I didn't actually write a book about adrenal fatigue, is that it was multi-layered, and there were many big and small things that got into it. But I used to be very afraid to just not do anything, to just chill, to just relax, to sleep. Everything that I did had to be about producing something. There had to be a point to it. And the thing that made it even harder for me to see that there was a problem with this is that society always rewarded me for it. So, I mean, I don't know the exact years, but I finished matric when I was 15. I think when I was 22, I bought my first house. I was the manager of a national radio station when I was 24. Like, I was an overachiever, and every time I got high-fived. There was an extra zero in my salary. I'd be featured in this magazine article or whatever. So the world tells you that, yes, do more of that, we like it. But that breaks you on the inside. It's not healthy, especially if it's coming from a pathology of some sort, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual, because it's not your natural inclination. It's a response, no different from taking drugs or eating your feelings or whatever. In my case, it turned out that a lot of it actually was an ancestral trauma, which is why it took so long for me to figure it out. And then I discovered it when I went for a family constellation session. And I found out, and I encourage people in my book, that you really need to start being curious about your lineage. Talk to your parents about their lives, what was happening when they were kids, your grandparents, if they're still alive, and go as far back as possible, because you never know what you're carrying genetically that's affecting you now. So I discovered, I grew up pretty middle class, upper middle class, in fact, but I discovered that my father's side of the family were really poor for a really, really long time, for a couple of generations, and they were living hand to mouth. And I always had this thing, and because of what I do, I hang out with other life coaches and healers and blah, blah, blah. And one friend of mine was analyzing me, and she was saying that the reason that you're always busy is because you don't want to be with yourself. I'm like, no, that's not it. And she was like, you're in denial, blah, blah, blah. But I could feel that that's not it, right? And it turned out that it was literally that. There was a part of me that genuinely 100% believed that if I stop doing, I will die. The way people who live hand to mouth, you have to go find bread for today and eat it, and then go find bread for tomorrow. And I had this in my actual body that I can't just lay around. And I had money and things to spare and savings and whatever, but there was this thing in my cells that I can't just sit and do nothing. And I mean, when you look at how much we're rewarded for doing, producing, we might not have all ended up there the way I have, but most of us have that illness, right? Of thinking that to justify your presence, you have to be productive, you have to produce, you have to have an opinion on everything, and so on and so on. And also the fact, which is what I talk about in the chapter about money, the fact that somehow we got ourselves into a position where we literally need to work to live. Like, how bizarre is that? That is the weirdest thing ever. Like, we have to pay to be on the planet. So we have to some extent gotten to a point where we have to be human doings, because the system is set up like that. But there's space, you know, where if you have to toe the line, to whatever extent you have to toe the line, and some of the rest of the shit we just sign up for. You know, like the car that you don't really need to have, and you're going to pay for it for 60 months or whatever, and the fancy bag, and some of these things, you can cut yourself some slack and not have to be on that red race so much.
Absolutely. So did you find the family constellation really helpful then? I mean, how did you integrate that familial, you know, ancestral process?
So I happen to know a lot of modalities. So I'm not sure if the actual session shifted that, but the session is what made me know what the thing was. And primarily, yeah, I used a lot of other things. The clearings, I do energy clearings myself, and there's at the time, I'm done now, there was some shamanic course that I was doing, and I got that guy to help me out. So the one thing that I still have, I don't know if it's a problem or whatever, if I have a problem, like, I throw everything at it, right? It's like, and I did a whole bunch of things, and I can't say which of them helped, but the family constellation is what made me, because I had been pulling off little strings around my doing versus being thing, but it wasn't quite shifting. There was a thing that was there that I wasn't getting, but it turned out that I wasn't getting it because it wasn't actually mine. So I had no frame of reference in my life experience to say this is where it comes from.
Okay.
Because I mean, I quit my fancy corporate job, and I remember the second month after I quit, I volunteered. I stopped myself, but I volunteered to be the, what's it called? So in my kids' school, there's like a mom. It could be a dad, but it's usually a mom who becomes like the deputy to the teacher and harasses other moms on WhatsApp and sends emails and organizes school trips and whatever. Okay. And I volunteered for that, and some pizza thing and whatever. I was like, wait, you know, you left the job so that you could, and I was managing all of those other little things, but I could feel like there's this thing that keeps on driving me to want to do more. And it turned out that it was my paternal ancestral stuff.
Yeah, so that paternal ancestral stuff creates a force of motion in you, and then your repetition in action creates a groove in your own mind and awareness.
Yeah. And
And
now
you
you've got the
yeah,
pathway.
exactly, you just keep going around the same loop. So I'm always interested in the technology people use to get themselves out of that groove. You know, and sometimes it's just knocking out and then you fall back in, and knocking out and fall back in. It can take some time before you actually don't go into it anymore.
Yeah, yeah. So I do. I mean, I reference two of the books that sort of teach it, but there's an energy clearing modality that I use. So I do it on clients as well, and I find that the key thing that's helped me shift a lot of the stuff is the breath work, and a very basic breath technique. It's called coherent breathing, and it's a balanced breath where your inhale is the same length as your exhale, and you don't pause. So you don't inhale, hold, and exhale. You just breathe in and out, breathe in and out. And what it does is that it sort of resets your vagus nerve, and your vagus nerve, which is also called the traveling nerve, is the biggest nerve in your body. And once it freaks out, everything else about you freaks out. And if you do that 3 times a day for literally 5 minutes, you start remembering that being calm is your natural state, and it pretty much does what meditation does, but much quicker. And anybody can inhale and exhale. Often when you tell people about meditation, it sounds intimidating, thanks to all those IG people in yoga poses, bendy poses and whatever, and you're like, oh my God, this is too deep, I can't do that. But breathing like for 5 minutes, and really quickly, within 6 weeks, you start creating more and more spaces between the freaky out thought and your reaction to it. So if I give anybody just one thing, 5 minutes. So what you do is you inhale to the count of 5, exhale to the count of 5, which means it's 6 breaths per minute. If you already have good breath capacity, you can extend it to 4 breaths per minute. But the idea is to balance your inhale and your exhale. Wow. And it sorts out your vagus nerve.
And you do that by a clock, so it's like a certain time, 3 times a day, or do you bring it in when you're in a state where you need to shift?
So how I do it is that I'll do it first after I do the school run. So I drop the kids at school, come back, and then I do it. And then I'll do it before lunch, and then I'll do it before supper. And the only reason I do it like that is that I find that if you set things before something you do every day, it's more likely to happen than if you set it based on a time. So if you say, I'm going to do it at 2, and if at 2 you happen to be in a meeting, you just throw the baby out with the bath water, like, oh, I missed it at 2. But I have to drop the kids off at school, and I come back, and it's the first thing I do. And before I eat, and the other reason I do it before I eat is also practical, because you have to do a proper belly breath. And if your stomach is full, there's not as much room to take such deep breaths. So you can, I encourage people not to do it before bedtime, because in a way it's wasted. The point of it is to teach you to be calm. So if you do it and then sleep, you don't derive the benefits from it. It's not going to kill you, but rather do it while there's still some living to do in the day.
Okay, that's fantastic. You're linking it to your daily routines is a great way of making it actually happen, because ideas are great, but taking action on ideas makes change possible, so we can get out of that groove. So talking about that groove, I mean, the next one is one of my joys in life, or at least looking at expanding your awareness to resolve your challenges. Just don't get your ass arrested. So what kind of experiences did you have that altered your perception?
So mainly in that chapter, I know I talk a lot about plant medicines. And the first plant medicine I ever took, like most people, was cannabis. But at the time that I was taking it, I was just being young and cool and being rebellious, and without the respect of what I do remember. Though the first time that I had an experience that was just beyond, I'm getting high. I was in varsity, and we'd gone to this party, and I smoked some cannabis, and I started seeing, as people spoke, I could see colors coming out of their mouth. And depending on what they were saying, the colors would be different. So if they were gossiping about someone, whatever, it'd be brown and murky. And if they were saying something nice, it was yellow and red and whatever. And I remember spending the entire time just walking from group to group, staring at people and what they were saying. And it's only afterwards because in my mind at the time, cannabis was just that thing that you do, at school. And I never made the connection until I did what was officially called plant medicines afterwards. But the first one that I was introduced to was ayahuasca. And that was it was maybe around 2006 or whatever. So it's relatively, compared to how mainstream the stuff is at the time, there wasn't quite a lot to I was going for healing sessions with a shaman who was also a life coach. I was primarily going to her because she was a life coach, and I was enjoying the sessions. And she kept on telling me that, there's this thing, you can come for a ceremony and it'll shift you much more than me and you just talking. And it sounded weird and dangerous. And I was also very afraid that I'm going to remember things that I don't want to remember. And I didn't know what I was repressing, but I figured that I'm repressing something. And if you're repressing something, you have a damn good reason why you're repressing it, and you should just keep it there, And then, you wouldn't just repress it for fun, right? It's probably because it's going to traumatize you. But eventually, because I was getting so much from his sessions, although they were not just coaching, which is what I do now, I coach and I do energy and healing work, right? And the shifts were so amazing that I said, okay, I trust her, let me try this. But I remember that on the first day that I went, they were in Centurion. But it was before we had location pins and all those things. I wrote the address and I sent it to a friend of mine and my mother and I think like 4 different people. I was like, listen, if I'm not back by this time, this is where you're going to find me, and I got so much out of it that it made me quite open to a lot of things. And for the longest time, it was just ayahuasca that I worked with. And then with time, it's been more than a decade since I've been using plant medicines. And with time, I've used other ones. And because I've done it for so long, I don't want people thinking I'm not a microdoser. I'm not those people that every month you're going here. I listen to my intuition, and then sometimes I get a sense that this is what's going to shift me. And I'll also get a sense of which plant it is. And I'll go for a year. I'll go for a year and a half without doing any plant medicines. So it's not a regular like the breath work. I know when I need it, it calls me.
Yeah, you got a whole bunch of tools in your toolbox, and some of them are sledgehammers, and some of them are, hairbrushes, and some of them are
useful. Because if all you have is a hammer, then everything's a nail, right? So it helps to have a couple of other things in there.
Yep. And in the battle for your own awareness and your own presence, pretty much anything at your disposal is fair game. If you feel it's going to help you.
Yeah, and the other thing that works just as well, I think, as the plant medicines is the breath as well, because it's strange because essentially breathing is just inhaling and exhaling, but it's amazing how much you can do with it. And I don't really go into detail about it in the book, but I got cured from claustrophobia from doing holotropic breath work. And it wasn't a pleasant experience at all. In fact, I was very claustrophobic. I couldn't go into like the loo in the plane. Like as soon as I went in there, I'd become convinced that I can't come out. I'll be here forever, even though it was irrational. And so like long distance trips were always an issue. I'd refuse to eat because I don't want to go in there, and just small spaces generally. And I was doing a holotropic breathwork session. And then I dropped into I'm assuming it's a past life memory of some sort. And I was this young man a soldier of some sort, and I was being buried alive. And I remember I was yelling and screaming that I'm not dead, I'm not dead. And I could feel the soil on top of me, whatever. And that was horrible. And I quit breath for, I think, about 8 years. It was so scary. and then I noticed, quite by mistake, because that wasn't even why I was there. And then a couple of months later, I was flying to Cape Town for a meeting, and I needed to pee, and I went to the loo and I came back. But only after I sat down, I was like, oh, I did that, you know? Yeah. And so yeah, there are plenty of different ways to get, I know people who get that kind of awareness from prayer, very traditional prayer. One of my cousins, excuse me, one of my cousins is a staunch Catholic, and we're actually gossiping about her during the weekend that I hate telling her about my problems, even when I don't want a solution. So I'll be talking to her, and immediately she says, there's a novena to Mother Mary, da 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 da, and then she gives me the novena, and then she tells me that we're supposed to do it every day for 9 days at 3 a.m. And I have nothing against praying for anything, but I don't know why these things always have to happen in the middle of the night. And then so she always, after she gives you these novenas, she'll always do them with you. And then she'll call you in the morning and she says, yeah, how was our novena in the morning at 3 a.m.? And I always lie because I never wake. I figure that if God can wait, right, until I wake up. And I feel bad that she's doing it on my behalf. But the point that I'm making is that I have seen her get amazing downloads just from being in that very spiritual space through a very traditional way. So I think my point is that there is no one way. You just need to find yours that just makes you bigger than your everyday self.
Well, I think the next one, and that'll be the last one because you're running out of time, is the distinction of I am versus I be, which you covered.
Yeah. So that was trippy. That I got from water, right? So the list of things I talked to. So I also, my new thing is dragons as well. but anyway, water. So trees, then water. So I had this thing where I was being harassed by the water. I won't really get into how the water was harassing me, but I was being harassed by water and I couldn't figure out what the water was trying to tell me. And eventually, when I got the message was that I need to stop I aming my roles and start to be them, which sounds strange, right? But when you think about water, is that if you put it in this glass, it's going to take the shape of this glass. If you put it in a bucket, it's going to take the form of the bucket. It's not nothing until it has to be something. And if you transfer it to something else, it changes that shape. And what happens with us is that we lose a lot of our energy because I am our roles. So one of the things, one of my roles is that I'm a mother, right? And most people don't realize this, but I can choose to be a mother or I am my mother role. And if I aming my mother role, it makes it hard for me to respond to the moment and be a different thing. And the example that I like to use is the sex one, because a lot of people can get this one, you know, it's something that you can hold. A lot of people, especially when they have young children, will wear their mother role all the time. And your husband tries to nibble at your neck and you're focusing on the children or whatever, and you're so stuck in this role that you have to go to, a friend of mine calls them vacations, where you have to actually go away, like create physical distance between you and your children just to take off that skin, you know, and you shouldn't be able to do that if you are being a mother in the moment. And in the next moment, you need to be a lover, or now that we all work from home, in another moment, you need to be a CEO. It doesn't drain your energy because you're not wearing any of your roles. So one of the examples I make in the book is a friend of mine whose wife is a psychiatrist. And she IMs her role as a psychiatrist so much that he doesn't socialize with her because she's always shrinking people all the time, because she doesn't know how not to not be a psychiatrist. And where the fatigue comes in is because you're so much bigger than that role. If you say, I am a CEO, I am a psychiatrist, your energy wants to cooperate with you. So it has to compress everything else to be tiny, 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 so that you can be as much of a psychiatrist as you can be. So a lot of energy goes to squeezing everything else down to give you all the room to be a psychiatrist. And that's how we lose so much of our energy from I-aming our roles.
That's fantastic. So get into be more.
Yes, just I be this, and then if the moment needs me to be something else, I be that, and if another moment needs to be something, I be that. And the thing is, when you're I being as opposed to I aming your roles, you're not even as hard on yourself, because if I be a CEO and I mess up, it's okay, it's a mistake. But if I am a CEO and I mess up, CEOs don't make those kinds of mistakes, you know. No. If I am a best-selling author and my third book doesn't do as well as that, oh God, what's happened to me? Where's my identity? Who am I now? But if I was being a writer, well, people like the book or they don't like the book, you know. It's just easier.
What I love about it, you know, as it links to the function of the flow of water, we are mostly water, you know, our nature is flow. So be in that flow of your life, gives you the flexibility to deal with every moment in the correct way for that moment, rather than being inflexible and then just getting all freaked out about the moment. Things changed.
Yes, right, because we freak out because things change and you're frozen in your role and you don't know how to be the next thing in response to what's happening around you.
So I'd suggest also cold water therapy really gets you into the being and it links you to the water again, because getting into freezing cold water is really uncomfortable, and change is mostly really uncomfortable for people. So it kind of trains you through your physiology to be okay with the sudden shift that's just happened to your body.
You know what? I'll let you have that one. Someone invited me to the Wim Hof thing. I was like, okay.
Ice
into ice water. Different folks, right?
Well, exactly. That's right. You got to find your toolbox that works for you, and
although I did let them put Sananga eye drops in my eyes, so who am I to judge people getting dunked into ice water?
See, I avoided that. I'll drink 3 cups of ayahuasca, no problem, but keep the eye drops away from me.
It sounds so dumb after the fact. Like, you know, if you had gone blind and you said to people, I actually volunteered to have someone put some exotic drops from the Amazon in my eyes. Why?
Yeah.
But yeah.
At least you didn't get hit by tobacco that blew your head off and made you vomit everywhere.
Yeah, true.
Oh, this has been fantastic. So thanks so much for joining us.
I see that we've got a couple of questions in the chat.
Heidi was asking about your book.
Yeah, Heidi wants to know. No, Heidi, you can just read the one. Hey, and actually, I've discovered that the other 2 are quite hard to find now in hard copy, but you can find them in ebooks. But this one, it's a book all on its own. You don't need to read the other ones. Sonia, thank you. And questions. I'd love to hear your take on self-sabotage. Well, we have 5 minutes. Do you want us to talk about that?
Let's go.
Guy, let's make a deal. Can you say that as opposed to, I don't know what to say about it just from this. Can you unmute yourself and tell us what you mean?
Hang on, I'm going to let her unmute.
Okay.
There we go. Guy, you can unmute yourself and then you can tell us the question if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind. Hi, I love this chat and I love your energy. You're fabulous. So energy healing, exactly what you should be doing. You're very uplifting. No, just because you've got such a lovely, interesting take on things, and I see that most of it comes from your own life experience. So it's really a bit of a blind side to throw you something like that. but it's something that's come in and out of my own journey. And so I thought I'd throw the question at you from an energy healer perspective, just to see how you'd answered with it, what your response was.
Okay, so I'm not sure, you gave me context, but you didn't ask me a question. Ask me a question.
Yes, that's true. I didn't. How would you view, if you had a client who came to you and said, I struggle with this, this is a pattern that I'm aware of in my life, how would you address that with them? Where would you direct them, or what question would you direct them to ask themselves, or how would you work with that?
So usually when it comes to self-sabotage in myself, in my clients, in my kids or whatever, the first thing that I ask is, how are you benefiting from this action, this choice at the moment? Which is always, it's okay when I do it on myself. Most people, when we do it the first time, they get very irritated. It's like, no, this thing is messing up my life. I'm benefiting nothing out of it. But you are. There's nothing that you do consistently if you're not deriving a benefit from it. It might be a stupid benefit, like if you smoke crack and you know it's breaking your family apart, but there's something that you're getting from it. And I often find that if you figure out what the benefit is, then we can work on finding a less destructive way to give you that benefit, or reframe why that thing is not beneficial. And sometimes it's from talking, sometimes, a lot of the times you have to shift some energy in terms of energy healing. But like you asked, question number one is, let's figure out what it is that you're getting from this. How is this serving you, essentially?
Okay, thank you. That's lovely. That's food for thought.
Thank you, Dai.
Thanks, Dai.
Thank you.
All right. I don't see any other questions, and our time has pretty much run out. So, Kagiso, any last words for anyone? One of the things I want to ask you is, where should I send people to learn more about you, to connect with you if they want coaching, that kind of thing?
So I'm building a new website because I've removed another skin as I flow with the water. So the best way for me now is through my Gmail, which is kagiso@gmail.com. So I do have a website with my name and surname, kagizomsimango.com, but it's not fully functional at the moment. You can go there and you can find out stuff about me, but none of the contact me stuff works yet. So just via basic Gmail, kagisomm@gmail.com.
Fantastic. And then obviously people can get your books from bookstores that sell books.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody. Yeah. Eckhard, Pooh, Anya, Heidi, Jennifer, Taylor, Pat, Zbo, Cindy, Liz, Moon. I don't know if Moon's, that's your real name. Sounds cool. Nicole, Rukshana. Thank you, Peter. Bye-bye. Have a lovely evening.
Definitely. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Guys, if you love the talk and you want to share with anyone, we have recorded it. It'll be on our website, Conscious Conversations page of Superfoods within the next couple of days, so you can direct people there. Next week, we're going to have a break, and then the week after, we'll get back to it. Keep an eye on our emails and on that page for the lineup for November. It's going to be very interesting. I've got some international guests on. Have a fantastic evening, Kagiso.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.